What's happening, everybody? Good to see you again. Thank you so much for all the support, and it's been a lot of fun to start seeing, you know, the community grow a little bit. Thank you for all your comments and your own stories and anecdotes. I've been really enjoying it. I hope you have as well. So thank you so much for all of that. After looking back, you know, now with all 14 of the gear videos and a couple of the cover videos and everything else, I realized that there were two parts on the kit that I hadn't yet covered. Number one being the microphones, and number two being the hardware. So we'll cover those. They're going to be separate videos, but we'll cover both of those areas. We're going to start with the microphones. The first time that my introduction to playing, or my introduction to having mics that were my own was, I think it was about 2013, I want to say. 2013, 2014, somewhere in that range. My band, The Cuz, was playing at the Alliant Energy Center here in Madison, Wisconsin for a roller derby. And that was the first time that we ever had to provide our own, you know, not just our own backline, our own instruments, but also our own mics that we could plug into their house PA system. So my dad went to Guitar Center and talked to one of the one of the sales reps there. And I think he walked in and said something along the lines of, "I'm gonna make your day." So basically that was the start of it. And so he bought mics that were not the highest end. They were just mics that would work for what we needed them to. So that was the beginning of it, and that still remains the case to this day, that a lot of these mics are not the best mics that you can buy for the applications that I'm using them for. It's really just that these are what I have available to me. So let's jump right in, starting with, as always, the bass drum. Now, I think it's becoming pretty commonplace, or maybe it already is commonplace these days, to have two mics on the bass drum, especially in a studio context. So the two mics I have right now on the bass drum are a Beta 52, a Shure Beta 52 dynamic supercardioid, and a Shure KSM 32 large diaphragm condenser microphone. And they work, I mean, these two specifically seem to work. I would always start with the Beta 52. For whatever reason, that one seems to capture both the low end from this drum that I want, and also the smack, the articulation, the sound of, you know, felt beater hitting plastic or mylar drum head. So I would definitely, as often as I can, stick with the Beta 52. And the KSM 32, it just helps reinforce that. If you were to look at the EQ graphs for both of these mics, the way I have it set up is that the Beta 52 it scoops out the mids, so it's concentrating on the low end and the high end articulation. And the KSM 32 is really concentrating on a very narrow bandwidth of frequencies from about 50 to 100 hertz, just to help reinforce, you know, still reinforcing the low end part of this sound, but making it just a little bit higher of a low end sound, so that the bass drum can read no matter what speakers you're listening on. If I just had the Beta 52 and you were listening on phone speakers or computer speakers or basically anything without a good subwoofer, it wouldn't have enough punch, especially in like Herd of Bison or Enfierce contexts, where it's a very heavy, rich, you know, layered sound. I need to double down on the amount of low end I can project out of this bass drum sound. So that's why they're both there. This would be the sound of just the Beta 52 by itself. And this would be the sound of just the KSM 32 by itself. And so if you put those two together, you get the sound of the bass drum. All right, so now moving on to the snare drum. The snare drum, the main snare here is actually just SM57, Shure SM57's top and bottom. Classic mic, classic application. I think even a lot of high-end studios and even a lot of high-end studio engineers still use SM57's top and bottom. Same kind of idea. Same kind of idea with the EQ curves. I should say the bottom snare mic is as close as I can get it to the snare wires, and it's only aimed at the snare wires. Because I'm trying to capture as much. I'm trying to capture as much of the sensitivity of the bottom snare head and the snare wires as much as I can. And so I did the same kind of thing with the EQ curves. That the top mic, I'm cutting the low end off because I don't need it. And I am actually cutting off a lot of the high end because for the top mic, I really want to focus on the sound of the rim, the sound of the shell, and the sound of the smack, the wood on mylar sound. And then let for the really high end frequencies that come from the snare wires, I'm letting the bottom mic take care of all of that. So just the snare top mic sounds like this. And just the snare bottom mic sounds like this. So you can hear the snare bottom mic is really, it's focused on one sound and one sound only, but it works perfectly because, so before I give any kind of further explanation, I should say, this is what those two mics sound like put together. And so you can hear they're not overlapping, they're not, crossing over each other. But the thing is that for playing ghost notes, first of all, you can't play ghost notes loud. But also, at least my particular goal with ghost notes is to get the sound to come only from the snare wires, not from the top head. And I find that sound works perfectly with the hi-hats that I have. And so if I feel like it mixes very well. So that's the reason why I don't mind that the bottom snare mic is very one-dimensional, because that's a dimension that I really want to be able to show through whenever I need it to show through. So that's the main snare. The second snare here, the Mike Mangini snare, I've EQ'd it in the same kind of way, again, top and bottom mic. The bottom mic is another SM57, Shure SM57, and the top mic in this case is actually it's a brand called CAD. I'm going to refer to it as CAD, and this one is the SN210 mic. It's the same brand, same style of mics that I have here on the 3 rack toms. I don't really actually know anything about these mics. To be honest, I got them. I got the set from my neighbor who was selling his drum mics, and he gave me a deal. I think I got the whole set for like $20, and that's a deal that I couldn't pass up. So, and given that they're perfect for clipping on the rims of these smaller drums, that's why I use them. So that's that's this drum. So same thing as before. Here's the top mic only. Here's the bottom mic only. And now here's the two together. Now obviously one of the things, especially in a studio context, that I need to worry about is the buzzing of the snares. And especially having this 18-inch floor tom here right next to, literally almost touch it. Yeah. Anyway, the snare wires on this second snare here they buzz a lot from the 18-inch floor tom. So if I'm not using this drum in a song, usually I turn the snares off, and that way the only buzz you hear is from the main snare and not from this one. Or the other thing I'll do is in post-production, if I'm not playing a drum at any one given time, I just cut that part of the audio file out. And that way hopefully there's not too much bleed and you can hear all of the patterns that I play. But anyway, that's this drum. One last, snare drum related item that I can demonstrate here is the foot snare. You probably have noticed by now, it's just a Shure SM57. That's what I had available to me. But it's nice and close, and it captures enough. It captures enough of the snare and enough of the head. So no complaints there. All right, so now let's start with these rack toms here. These rack toms, like I just mentioned, these mics are all made by that company CAD. I should know more about these, but I don't. These are all the TM211 mics, and really I'm using them because they fit. They fit nicely, and they seem to capture enough of the tonality. So each drum individually, let's start here with the 10-inch. Does the trick. 12-inch. Same thing, does the trick. And 13-inch. No complaints there. Moving on down, we've got the two 16-inch floor toms. These are, once again, SM57s, the old standby. And, same thing, they're just what I had available. And they actually do a really, really good job of capturing the weight of these two higher floor toms in the setup. So, the higher 16 sounds beautiful, and the lower 16. Now we're starting to get into the thunder range of the kit. So now the last two floor toms, in fact the last three floor toms, counting the trash can floor, you'll notice I have Beta 52s on all of them. Especially, this was an idea that started with this drum because it is, after all, a bass drum. And I didn't trust a 57 or any other kind of normal tom mic to really capture all of the low-end, subwoofer, air-moving weight of this drum. So I put a Beta 52 on it, and originally I put a 57 on the 18, but then I started to realize that in order to make the 18 speak in a truly weightier context than this higher 16, this lower 16, I had to crank the gain up, which meant that this had a lot of bleed from everything else. So I started to wonder if actually putting a Beta 52 on it would capture the low end the way I wanted it to with less bleed. So I put a Beta 52 on it, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So then that meant that now there's a Beta 52 on the 18 as well. As well as, like I said before, there's Beta 52 on the 22. So just the tom spread by itself, I think, each one is able to pop out where it needs to and, speak in, the higher drums being very tonal, these two higher drums being very tonal and very bright. The kind of middle three being, deep and rich, but also very, very tonal. And the bottom two just being thunder, being straight thunder. And now to bring the last one here into the mix, the trash can drum. I tried a couple of different miking, scenarios with it, And really, I just came back to putting one Beta 52 on it. It seems to do the trick. It captures, I mean, it definitely captures the low end, but it also captures the you know, like we talked about before, that sound of the steel resonating and the sound of the bottom going whoom, whoom. It really seems to do the trick. Now the rototoms up here, at the, you know, these are all SM57s. Once again, that's what I had available, so I went with it. Nothing truly special about them. Again, that's just whatever I had available to me. Now, I'll get to the percussion mics in a second, and I'll get to those now. So when I was working on Lord Buffalo, at the time, what I had was actually 4 overheads, and they were all Shure PG81s. Those were the original overhead mics that my dad bought back in 2013, 14, whatever it was. And they're definitely not high-end condenser mics, but they were what we had, so that's what I was using. So I had 4 of them, and they were set up to capture the kit. And I found over the course of post-production and mixing and mastering Lord Buffalo that you could hear the toll spires and the cowbells, but they didn't have the same punch that like for example, that the toms had. And so I started to think about putting mics specifically on, you know, this group of toll spires and this group of cowbells, just to help give them again, say kind of like the kick drum, that readability, so that they could really cut through in any context, in any volume, anyway. So for both of them, SM57, that's what I had available to me. I apologize, I'm gonna keep saying it. So one mic here is for the toll spires, and one here is for the cowbells. And it might seem like a really small thing, but I'm gonna do that again without those mics in there, and then I'll do it a third time, and I'll put the mics back in there, and hopefully you'll be able to hear the difference. So without the close mics, and now with the close mics back in. So I think it helps, like for example, the difference, it would be the difference between listening to the album Lord Buffalo, which is available on Spotify and Apple Music and wherever you get your music from, as opposed to listening to the Lord Buffalo playthrough videos that are on my YouTube channel. Because the recording of the album, I didn't have the close mics, but the playthrough video I did. Anyway, I'll stop yapping about that. At this point, I think there's only 3. Taking a look around, yeah, there's only 3 mics. I guess 4 mics technically, that I haven't talked about yet. So let's start here with these 2. These are both Shure KSM 44s. Basically, a while ago, I was working. When I was a student at Berklee College of Music in Boston, Massachusetts, I was working a lot with a friend of mine. And we would do a lot of sessions where I would track drums just using 4 mics. He was a big fan of the Glenn Johns technique. So we'd have a Beta 52 in the kick, SM57 on the top of the snare, and then 2 overheads, and that was it. And the overheads were KSM 32s, and they actually did a really good job of capturing the depth and the richness of the kit, even though they were over top of the kit, and they weren't close mic'd on the toms or anything like that. So when I was looking at upgrading from the PG81s, I immediately thought about the KSM 32s, and so I asked an engineer friend of mine named Dustin Sisson, who lives here in Madison, and he recommended to me that I actually go with the KSM 44s because they were essentially the same type of, the same mic. They're also large diaphragm condensers, but they have you can change the polar pattern. So you can do omnidirectional, bidirectional, or cardioid. Right now, both of mine are set to omnidirectional on his recommendation. But other than that, the KSM-32 and the KSM-44s are very, very similar sounding mics. And I mean, really, the overheads are doing the bulk of the mixing work for me. And that's the way it should be. You should be able to get a good sounding mix just by having those two mics. All of these other, all of these other close mics, they're just filler. It has to sound good in the overheads first and foremost. So if I was to play a little bit just using the overheads, that might sound like this. Or something like that anyway. So yeah, so that's the sound of the two overheads. These have really helped my sound. Again, if you want to hear the difference, listen to Lord Buffalo, the studio album on Spotify. That's by Herd of Bison. And then go back and listen to the Lord Buffalo playthroughs that are on my YouTube channel. You'll hear the difference. Yeah, you'll hear the difference in the way the overall kit sounds. Now the last the last drum mic that I can talk about is way over back here. You can just barely see it in this camera. When I first set the gong up, I was still using 4 PG81s. And I kind of had them hanging, like one was here, one was here, one was here, and one was here. And the thing was, I mean, they did a good job of capturing the kit, but anytime I hit the gong and it started waving back and forth like this, I would get this almost phasing sound out of the mic that was right here. I'm going to talk to this camera for a second. So the mic was here, and the gong is going like this. So it would make this sound like wow. So I wanted to stop that from happening. So as soon as I went back to a 2 overhead setup with the KSM-44s, all of a sudden I had these PG81s that I wasn't doing anything with. So I put one of the PG81s directly behind the gong. You can see it. Here, I'll keep talking to this camera. It's right here, and it's directly behind the gong, and it stops that Doppler effect from happening, but it also is aimed right at the center here of the gong. And it really, I adjusted the gain and everything, I adjusted the post-production sound of that mic so that when I hit the gong, it really is an exclamation. Because I want it to feel, it feels that way to me to go, to me that feels like an exclamation. It feels like a moment that needs to be captured. And so I want to make sure that, not just with this mic, but with any of these mics, that they help me translate the excitement I have for playing any of these crazy, ridiculous patterns. I want to make sure that they help me translate that through the mics, through the recorded music to whoever's listening to it. And I feel like having that PG81 right there helps me do that. So I think that's, the only other mic that I have been utilizing recently is this little clip-on mic. It's some kind of a Sony. I forget exactly what the technical details are, but It's been really nice. When I had the idea to do the gear videos, I was using just Shure SM48 because that was the only vocal mic that I had access to, and I set it up on a stand, and immediately I realized, because this camera here, this was before I had the Rototom set up, so that camera was actually much higher up. So I had to look up in order to talk to the camera, but that meant that I couldn't talk into the mic, and plus it was getting in the way of my hands and everything like that, and I wanted to make sure that I can be expressive while I'm talking, and some might say rambling, and so I decided to get one of these clip-on mics just so that I can move around, I can talk to this camera, this camera, this camera, even that camera back there, and you'll always have a consistent sound of my voice. So that's been very cool. So anyway, that's a little overview of the mics, and once again, thank you so much for all the support, and I'll see you next time.